Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, GSM phones are vulnerable to a very simple tracking technique. All you need is a little bit of open source software and some spare hardware. We'll share the details with you. Plus, we get asked this question a lot. Why is my email server being blocked, and what can I do to fix it? We'll tell you that answer, plus we introduce our Hall of Shame. All that and more in this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi, everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. This is episode 46, and we recorded this one live on February 23rd, 2012. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is provided by the ever-present ScaleEngine.com. My name is Chris, and joining us for all 46 weeks with 100% uptime is the tech, the admin, and the teacher, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, whatever you do, don't screw with my nines.
That's right. That's right. We are always watching that 100% uptime.
Yeah.
Of course, now that I said that, I'm probably going to jinx us. And it's funny, too, because on the pre-show, on the live stream, we were talking about episode 52 will be the 1 year mark. And I'm going to be really happy if we make it to 52 episodes without a break. Then after that, the expectations are gone. We can take a break. We can never take a break. But if we just make it a solid year, I think that's a good accomplishment right there.
That is always a nice
achievement
benchmark there.
Yeah. Well, we've got a good show today. We've got an interesting news story and another epic war story from the other Alan that we'll get to. And then the roundup this week is comprised of
huge.
Yeah, like lots of stories that we thought we definitely have to talk about, but we're not sure if they're main meat topics. So
a bunch of them might have made it into the main topic, but there's just shy of enough information to do that. So our roundup section will be longer than usual,
but a fun one. I'm looking forward to talking about all those stories.
Lots of good stuff.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, why don't we get trucking here, since we've got our first story, which sounds like a pretty interesting one. And if I read the headline, I'm led to believe it's about leaky cell phone networks. What's going on here?
Yeah, so we've talked about the fact that you could have someone could use your cell phone against you to track where you are, but most of those usually depend on layer 7 stuff, right? It's applications like the iPhone having that little text file or
location database file.
Yeah, a little database of all your location history and stuff. But this research coming out of the University of Minnesota is based on lower level parts of the IP stack. So mostly looking at like the IP layer, so layer 3 and lower, basically. So the researchers at the University of Minnesota have found a way for an attacker using only open source software to be able to track down your cell phone to within 1 square kilometer.
No.
Yeah. So what this is based on is the GSM protocol, which is the protocol for pretty much all phones in North America, except for the few that use CDMA.
Verizon Wireless and Sprint.
And then Bell in Canada uses CDMA.
I think there's like one other US cellular or something like that uses CDMA in the US, yeah.
But AT&T, T-Mobile, et cetera, are all GSM.
And pretty much everywhere in most of Europe, I believe, is GSM.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So the GSM protocol attempts to mask the identity of individual devices, like your phone, by basically using a temporary ID instead of your phone's immutable ID number.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
However, it is possible to map a specific phone number to what its temporary ID is. Right. So the temporary IDs aren't that secure.
Oh,
if you're just looking at data from a while ago, you can't tell what is what. But if you're watching live data, you can basically create a pattern and then notice which temporary ID has that pattern, and then you map it out to the phone number.
That makes sense.
So also that mapping is only one. You can go from a phone number to figure out its temporary ID, but if you know a temporary ID, you can't get back to the phone number.
Okay.
Right? So it only works one way. But so the way the attack works is that the attacker would place repeated PSTN, or regular plain simple telephone network calls, to your mobile number. So to be able to basically detect your phone, but without you knowing what's happening. So the easiest way would be send you a text message, but then you get a text message, so you would know that somebody is sending messages to your phone.
Exactly.
So at one point they were using malformed SMS messages. So they would, make your phone send a text message that wasn't valid, so that the receiving phone would just ignore it.
Sure.
But what's invalid and so on is different on each phone and each carrier, so that wasn't the best way to do it. But if you make a phone call to a cell phone It usually takes about 2 or 3 seconds before the connection actually happens.
Yeah.
And the median time is about 7 seconds before the cell phone on the other end actually starts to ring. Right?
I've noticed that, yeah.
Yeah. So if you place a regular phone call and hang up after 4 or 5 seconds, that cell phone will get a message from the cell network saying there's a call, but then they get a message that the call's gone. And so they never actually, the phone never rings because the call was disconnected before it ever started.
Right. That makes sense.
So basically, the way cell phone networks work is that everybody's out there all the time. And when the cell network needs to contact you to say you have a new text message or you have an incoming phone call, it sends out a broadcast on the nearest couple of cell towers to you saying, hey, phone number, temporary ID here, there's a call for you.
Right.
And then that phone calls, makes a request back to the cell tower, say, all right, give me some channel to set up on, and then we can connect the call. But in this case, the call's gone before that happens. But that ping goes out, but that ping only goes out on the cell towers that are near the user, right? Because there's only so much traffic you can put across the wireless spectrum.
Right, so to save bandwidth.
Right, so save bandwidth. AT&T doesn't send the ping out on every AT&T cell tower in the world.
Of course.
With roaming and stuff, you would literally have to send out the broadcast on every single cell tower in the world.
A nationwide network would be just broadcasting that kind of stuff constantly. It would be inundated with that. That makes sense. Right. I never thought of it.
The cell network knows where you are and sends it out on the cell towers nearest to you.
Right.
But someone else, because it's a broadcast, that means everybody receives that wake-up call, that page to your phone.
Oh, really?
But, right, it's just like a broadcast on your LAN, right? Except for only the card with the MAC address that the broadcast is addressed to would receive it.
So basically,
are you saying the network sends out a page saying, well, phone number 74172, please pick up the phone, right?
The way I'm interpreting that, Alan, is then if I'm in a location that has a lot of cell phone users, then I have more messages being sent to my phone constantly, which is probably taking more of my battery life.
Yes.
That's stupid.
But it happens at a very low hardware level, and then only when your phone actually sees its ID number come up does it actually wake up and start doing something.
It's literally like a NIC sitting on the network looking for a wake on LAN packet.
Or basically, or it's the same way that wireless works, right? It's ignoring all messages that aren't addressed to its MAC address.
Makes sense.
So anyway, so this causes the cell towers in the area to send out a page request saying, "Will this phone please wake up?" to either the temporary ID or the mutable ID if that phone hasn't negotiated a temporary one.
Right. Okay.
Which happens, from the look of the research, happens about 10% of the time that it uses the actual ID of the phone rather than the temporary one, making that phone much easier to track. So anyway, so if the attacker happens to be listening on the radio frequency with their phone, the attacker can determine if the target is within range of them. So if you're in one place and I'm nearby and I initiate a call to your cell phone and look for your temporary ID to come up, I can tell whether you're near me or not. Because if you're not, then that cell phone network's not going to broadcast your temporary ID near me.
Right. But
if you are, it will.
Then you know you're with that person within at least the same range as the towers you're within range of.
Yes. Now, if I don't know your temporary ID, I have to figure that out first. But if I'm looking at the list of all the temporary IDs coming up that have incoming calls or whatever, if I call you every couple of seconds and hang up, when I keep seeing the same ID happening at the same time I'm placing my calls, I can eventually prove that that's your phone number.
So you just need to know the phone number, and then as long as you're monitoring.
I keep pinging it until I figure out which in different patterns until I figure out which temporary ID belongs to that phone number.
It's funny when you lay it out like this. It seems actually relatively simple.
Right. Well, a lot of the cell phone network stuff just relies on obscurity, right? And the weird part is, some of these GSM protocols are open protocols. It's just no one's bothered to try this before.
You have a research paper, and in the research paper, they have a screenshot of their setup. It's literally two phones.
Yes, they have a laptop.
Yeah.
Wired up to one of the phones, and that's the one they're using to basically listen in on the GSM network. And then they have a second phone, which they call the victim, and that's the one that they're tracking around the city. And then they have their regular hardline telephone that they make calls to the victim with.
Oh yeah, they're extreme hackers, Alan. They're using Linux on a MacBook. Yeah. That's how you know they're extreme.
Well, they're using open source software.
Yeah, I know. I just thought I'd be a funny guy.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. It's basically a setup you could easily throw in your laptop bag. That's no problem.
Pretty much. And then basically you can figure out if that cell phone is near you or not. And then especially when the person's moving around, you can keep narrowing it down until,
Yeah, what do you think? Like Sheber in the chat room is saying, well, this all seems kind of random. What are the chances of someone knowing where you are and trying to track down this exploit? Well,
the range can be like 100 square kilometers where this broadcast goes out. So you can narrow it down fairly quickly. But some of the uses they talk about in the paper and that I could think of are if you're an oppressive government, like some of those in the Middle East that are having all these protests, right now you have to rely on a telephone company to help you track somebody down. And some of those cell phone companies aren't willing to help very much, right? They'd rather not get involved in oppressive dictatorships and so on. So if you're the dictatorship, you could use this without having to have the cell phone companies help anymore. But you could use it just to tell whether someone was at a protest or not.
It also gives me a better understanding of how the cell phones technology works, because they do this as well for law enforcement. It's based on requests, and so it kind of gives me a better idea of probably what they're doing.
Right. So the cell phone network knows where you are because it needs to know which nodes to be able to send the broadcast to.
Right.
And the police could subpoena that information. But if you're at a certain, like if there's like an Occupy Wall Street protest going on in a certain area or something, then by doing these fake calls to a number and listening near that protest, you can tell whether that person is there or not.
I could see all kinds of uses for this, bad ones too. Like I could see employers using this to verify that their contractors or employees that are on the road are really where they say they are and things like that. Or parents tracking kids. Who knows?
Yeah, but also some examples they listed are tell if somebody's at home or not before you try to rob their house.
Oh, totally right.
Right? You can make sure that they're nowhere near their house before you break in. Or
you could even verify they're at work. You could even verify they're at a location that is going to take them a while to be at.
Yeah. Or it's like if they're not within 100 square kilometers of their house, that's plenty good, right? Because that'd be 10 kilometers.
Yeah.
Or 5 kilometers in each direction away from their house would make a 10 kilometer.
Yeah, because since you're getting all the towers in the area, you essentially can verify a radius that they're not at.
Yeah,
it's almost as good to verify
range of any cell tower that's within range of their house and things like that. Or also, because if you were using a bunch of these, you could triangulate somebody. You could narrow it down to like one specific cell tower and tell where someone is, not quite specifically to which building, but very close. It could be used by terrorists to hunt down a specific person. Or, even it could be used by the paparazzi to stalk celebrities or whatever.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, news. Yeah, I could see that. Interesting stuff, Alan.
Yeah.
And
the research paper explains it a lot better than I can and has lots of diagrams and
great research paper.
And,
the good PDF.
Yeah.
It says here in the PDF
do a good job of explaining a lot of it, too.
Yeah, it says here in the PDF that they estimate that 5 billion cell phone users use GSM as of 2010.
Yeah.
Or, no, I'm sorry, 5 billion users as of 2010 are on cell phones, 80% of which are GSM.
Yeah.
So that's interesting stuff to think about. And GSM this is like the third or fourth story in the last 2 months that we've had that's talked about.
The technology was invented in like the 80s or 90s. It's rather old, but it's hard to replace these handsets, especially when you start talking about, there's countries in Africa and so on where the cell phone and text messaging is the only form of communication that they really have, right? They don't have actual landline networks to rely on.
Right.
And they're mostly using older, even, old people's used handsets from before and so on. And so replacing that is not something that's very easily done.
And again, kind of like the chat room's general take on it, it's not something that I'm going to personally worry about. But when the tools are so readily available, that's kind of one of those things.
The paper actually talks about some of the things that the cell phone companies could do to mitigate a lot of this, like regenerate the temporary IDs more often.
Sure.
And make them last longer, or make them not last as long. Also, just don't target the broadcast quite as much. Make sure the broadcast always goes out on like the nearest 8 cell phone towers instead of like normally it's between 1 and 4 towers. If you just made it the nearest 8, you're not going to waste that much of your spectrum, and you're going to basically kill all the accuracy on the on this method of tracking someone down.
I could even see advertisers using this and things like that, or stores to track who's around their area. And oh man, could you imagine the possibilities down the road?
Now, doing it on a mass scale might be a problem with making all of those aborted calls and so on.
The service or something.
And you would have to have each person's phone number ahead of time. Whereas, for in a store, they could probably be better off just by tracking all the people who have wireless turned on their cell phones and a bunch of things like that.
Or Bluetooth and
Yeah, because with wireless, everybody's got a MAC address, and that would be unique to their phone. It wouldn't ever change, and they could use that as a unique identifier.
There you have it. Well, so I recommend go check out the PDF. They got some good charts in there, and they've also got the description of their setup on how they did it. It's a pretty interesting thing, and it reveals probably something that the internal cell phone company people have already known how to do for a really long time. I'm sure this is...
Yeah, they've never tried to do it this way, because why would they need to do that? They know exactly where everybody is.
Well, the cellular companies may be very aware of this is exactly how the system works, and they even use it to their advantage to track, different aspects of their network. But to be able to have just the general public reverse engineer it like that, I think is the real story here. So,
yeah.
All right, Alan, anything else on that story?
No, that's about it.
All right, well, then let's say hello to the good folks over at GoDaddy.com, because GoDaddy.com is rocking a bunch of deals, and one of the ones that I have been negligent to recommend to you guys because I've been so focused on their great offer for hosting, which if you are looking for hosting, go check out our show notes. But Alan, I said before the show started, I feel like a dope, because .co domains are sort of the new hot domain, and we've actually got a great deal that expires at the end of February, so you've only got a few days left to take advantage of this. Normally, a .co domain is $29.99, but if you use our code COFEB8, that's one word, COFEB8, when you check out, you'll get that .co for $7.99. That's actually a fantastic deal.
It is.
And I've got a feedback email where somebody wrote in, and I'm going to tell you what they used a .co domain for. Mm-hmm. And it's actually a perfect thing because you can grab it now if you want to. This in the feedback. I don't want to give away too much, but we're using it in a way to sort of add additional functionality. If you go to the .co domain, you see something a little different. It's still Jupiter Broadcasting, but it might be something a little different. I love that as a use for .cos, but I also like the idea of just grabbing .cos, so that way you can protect your brand and protect your site online, so someone can't screw with you.
But also as the domain hacks. Actually, one of our clients has a consulting firm called Collabico. That was the name of the company. And so when the .co domains came out, he was like, all right, he went and got collaba.co, and it's,
perfect.
And it makes a cool, easy to remember domain name.
Yeah.
And, even though collabico.com maybe was taken by something else, he managed to get by using this domain hack, right? It's just like, other sites we've seen like Delicious and so on that use the .us as part of the name.
And doesn't like Pinboard's like, and Pastebin, a couple of those, pinboard.in or something like that. There's a bunch of different ones out there. But I would say if you're going to go for one, go for the .co, because that's sort of the universal one that people are going with these days. And the deal where you get it for $7.99 as opposed to $30. I mean, come on, folks, go grab that. So that's again, the code for that is COFEB8, and I'll also include it in the show notes along with some other codes that could save you depending on what you're shopping for. And thanks to GoDaddy for their support of TechSNAP. All right, Alan. Well, I teased it a little bit, but now it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. And welcome to the TechSNAP feedback segment. Thank you for sending your questions to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. Alan and I both have like 200 years combined system admin experience. So if you're stuck and you've got a question, we're a great resource, and we'd love to answer your questions here on the show. So again, that's techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or submit your questions to our Reddit, because honestly, sometimes we don't get to every email, and you have a good chance of getting some replies over at links.techsnap.tv. That's the show's subreddit. All right, Alan. We've got 2 feedback questions before we get to our war story. You ready for me to read number 1?
Yep.
All right, here we go. The first one comes from Ryan, a.k.a. Gutter Gulch, in the chat room, and I actually mentioned this during the GoDaddy spot, but he says, several of my friends and I watch your great shows on the network, and we would like to throw together a site that will load the shows faster for you on phones and tablets. And so I talked to him a little bit off air about this, and he's looking at, or a little over email, and he's looking at building essentially a site for mobile browsers and things like that. And he said he used the promo code, the COFEB8, when he bought the JupiterBroadcasting.co to buy that bad boy. So nothing really to report yet, but it's exciting, and I just thought that was kind of a neat thing that they not only are doing something for the show and the community, but they also help support the network by by using one of our sponsors too. So I wanted to say thank you to Ryan, who's in the chat room right now too. So he's even a live watcher. That's pretty awesome.
Yep.
All right, sir. Well, our first actual question comes in, and man, is this a great question. Of course, I just closed it because I'm a spaz. But I have run into the issue where I'm sure probably, Alan, you've never had this issue because you already take care of it before. But I'll walk into a client.
I've had the issue.
Have you?
I remember way back when I got my very first co-located server, I had this issue with the whole ISP being in one of these.
Very common. I have this issue when I walk into a client who has a mail server on site, and they just kind of quickly set it up. Here, I'll read the question. So Tracy writes in, my web host has been added to an RBL, and now emails sent from my domain and from my website cannot be received by some people. Can you explain what an RBL is and why it's blocking my email? What do you think, Alan?
Yeah. So Tracy is 10 girl or Bunny in the chat room.
Oh, cool. Yeah, Bunny.
So and specifically, she's linking to an incident where DreamHost had their mail servers added to the Trend Micro RBL.
Yeah.
Trend Micro is like an antivirus company. So an RBL, or real-time blacklist, is basically a list of IP addresses or domains that the maintainer of the list feels should be blocked from sending emails.
Right.
So when different companies subscribe to an RBL, they basically use that to decide what emails to accept and which ones to reject.
Okay.
At Scale Engine in our system, we use Spam Assassin, and we apply a bunch of different RBLs together, and each positive ranking for an RBL increases the score, and if the score goes over a certain threshold, then we block it.
Right.
So we don't rely on any one RBL as a deciding factor, because RBLs can be wrong and they're updated at different speeds and so on and so on. So we usually rely on a combination of where if a whole bunch of positives come up together, then we'll decide to reject the email.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. That way you don't have one list dictating who can send you email or not.
Right. And there are many different RBLs, and different ones have different criteria for how you get on or off the list. And most of the RBLs also use DNS as their distribution method, because DNS is so fast and lightweight. And it has extremely low latency. So when you go to look something up, you get a result in like milliseconds.
Right.
Whereas if you have to make a TCP connection and then make a request via HTTP and so on, it's going to be a lot slower than DNS.
So how do you suppose Bunny got on this RBL list?
Well, it wasn't her specifically. It was all of DreamHost.
Oh my gosh, that's awful.
Yeah. And it took them about a week to solve it, and it's not completely solved yet.
Oh, you know what? Actually, just to briefly interrupt, just so we have something to point people to, as a USR reminded me of my favorite tool to check if you've been blacklisted is a tool over at MX Toolbox/blacklist. I'll put a link to this in the show notes. Great resource to checking it, to do a diagnostic to see if you're on any of these spam or blacklists. If you start getting reports from people like at AOL.com, as if one of the first ones, or Gmail, or Comcast.net, who are not getting your emails, you're very likely on one of these lists. And you can go use this to check.
I don't know that Gmail actually uses any RBLs. They just have their own list, because
they must use something, because I had a client that got on it.
They have their own internal one based on just the volume of they get so much email, they have such a large sample, they don't really need anybody else.
Well, and they own Postini now too, which is
one of the other big ones. So when an ISP, like say Comcast, receives new email for one of their customers, so somebody at Comcast.com or net or whatever they use, they'll basically check on the details of the email and run that against a bunch of different RBLs. So it checks the IP that the email came from. If there's links in the email, they check those domains. And basically, if one or more of those RBLs returns a positive result, then they might decide to either flag that email as spam and send it to the junk folder, or to just reject it entirely, which is the case in this example. Mm-hmm. And then different RBLs cover different problems. SpamHost is one of the big ones, and they have a bunch of different lists that cover, sources of spam, Trojan PCs, and open proxies. So if a PC has been compromised by a virus or a Trojan or something, then a lot of times attackers will bounce off of that to send their spam or to just do nefarious things of any kind. There's also lists of dynamic IP ranges. So if anybody's on cable or DSL or anything that has DHCP, those people normally shouldn't be a source of email, right? They don't send email directly. They would send it to Comcast, who would then send it
No,
on.
normally when those IPs in the vast majority are sending emails because it's like a PC has been infected at somebody's house and now it's a mail
And
relay.
actually, almost all home ISPs will block port 25 outbound specifically to prevent them from being a source of spam.
Yeah.
But also, SpamHouse maintains one based on domain names. So whenever there's a link in spam, if basically those domain names can get on these blacklists and then won't be able to, any email that contains that domain name has a higher chance of being blocked. And that basically prevents the spammers from just changing the source of the spam all the time and keeping the website that they're sending the spammers to the same.
Right, okay.
Now, this one actually came up to me one time where my domain was listed in there because one of my DNS servers happened to be at an ISP that was blacklisted.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to basically stop doing business with that ISP so that my domain wasn't associated with any of their IPs, so I would get off this list.
Right.
And that's how a lot of these RBLs work, is they're basically, to make spam uneconomical, they basically force ISPs to never do anything, to basically nip spam in the bud as soon as possible, otherwise face losing all of their customers, not just the spammer, right? Like they're back in about 2002 or 2003, there was a popular RBL called Spews. And its basic idea was if there's any source of spam from an IP address, they would block the entire ISP until they solved the problem. The idea being, for example, I was with a small co-location company, just a little local one, and they happened to accept a lot of money from a spammer to host their spam server.
Yeah, boy.
And, they would get the reports and they would switch IP addresses or whatever. But being a small co-location provider, this was a huge source of income for them. So they didn't want to have to get rid of this guy. But they got listed in Spews meant that all their legitimate customers had all their email blocked. The idea being that me, as a legitimate customer, I have to move somewhere else and basically stop paying my co-location provider until they learn their lesson.
That sucks.
Yeah. And so you can see both sides of the issue, right? As a legitimate customer, my email's being blocked and I haven't done anything wrong, but the only way to get my ISP to stop allowing the spammers was to take away all their money by making all their customers leave to get away from the blacklist.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how that works. And then other RBLs like spamcop.net, those ones are based on emails that intercept. So they run a honeypot where they just sprinkle email addresses all over the internet. And when bots that scrape websites or things like that pick up these email addresses, start sending them spam, they get added to the blacklist. Right? Because basically these are random email addresses that should never receive any email. So any email they do get is spam. And then they also have a service where they will filter your email for you for like $3 a month.
That's where I've heard of these guys. Oh, yeah. Okay.
And based on the emails they see with that, they can also improve their lists.
Sure. Yeah. Adds more data for them to analyze. Yeah. That makes sense.
So one of the most common ways for a web host to get added to an RBL is when one or more customers are running an insecure CGI or PHP script that can send email. Right? I've had this happen with my customers. One of them installed this little, like PHP form, some, script written by some random kid and put up on SourceForge or something. Yeah. But, somebody finds an exploit for it and they make a new version, but my customer is running like a 5-year-old version of some PHP script.
They didn't know to upgrade. They didn't know.
And so basically by submitting a malformed email to this form, they could send, basically what they submitted to the forum was a blank invalid email that the forum would process and never send to the owner of the site. And then there'd be 10 other emails attached under that my mail server would process in order.
Tricky.
Making it send out spam from my IP address on their behalf. And it kept doing that. And so my IP address got put in this. Right. And basically I had to track down where the spam was coming from and remove the script. Luckily, there's a patch for PHP that makes PHP include a header in every email saying which user and site the email is sent on the behalf of.
Oh, okay.
And from that, I was able to figure out which customers had the script. And then a little grepping later, I found the culprit and solved the problem.
Very nice. Okay. That makes sense.
So good. That can cause it to send large amount of spam. Other ways I've seen it happen, brute force attacks against POP3 accounts. get that, and then they can almost everywhere your POP3 account is the same password or same database for username and password as the SMTP server. So then they could authenticate and actually send email relay legitimately. Or there's a bunch of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Other ways is sometimes when there's a script that's vulnerable, they can actually upload their own PHP files to run, and they can install mailers or whatever. So a lot of these RBLs are also automated.
Yeah.
So basically, they'll just add an IP as soon as it's detected as a source of spam, and then it will be removed once it has stopped sending spam for 24 hours.
Right.
Those ones work quite well. Although, because you can't get your thing removed, sometimes you end up suffering for a day. But
yeah.
The other common cause of getting listed in an RBL is hosting a site that is the target of a spam message rather than the source. So whatever site the spam is linking to can get in a blacklist. So when a web application like WordPress is compromised, the attacker may be able to install their own site in a subdirectory or something to that effect. Right? Like I've seen this happen to my customers as well, is they get hacked and then they basically install a phishing site in a subdirectory.
Yeah.
And then that's the target of spam.
Yeah.
Because I got an email from Bank of America once, I think it was, being like, we're getting reports of a phishing site. It's over here. And I tracked it down, so sorted it out. Like they knew what had happened, that it wasn't that I was doing it on purpose or anything. But they're good. Like, can you shut this down for us? Because we would like our customers not to get phished. Right, so it could actually be the page that tries to sell the people that click on the spam something. It could be a phishing site I've seen ones that look like PayPal or a bank or whatever. Or it could actually be malware, right? It's like the executable or a JavaScript that the user will end up running. Right, like the attachment in an email and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Like this last example is similar to what we saw the other week with Cryptome.
Yeah.
Where they had Cryptome was hosting their own malware in this case, right? In a directory they had uploaded a JavaScript.
Right.
But basically, if other hacked sites on the internet end up embedding in JavaScript from your page, then you could get in an RBL from like an antivirus vendor because you're hosting the exploit that's actually going to run and cause damage to someone's computer. And so that's another way you can get an RBL. Also, in the past, I think it was Spamhaus had been involved in legal battles because the people that are sending emails that end up getting blocked by an RBL were trying to sue the RBL, saying you're blocking my ability to send emails and do business, or you're costing me money or whatever.
Right.
But it's not up to Spamhaus Spamhaus didn't actually block your email. Spamhaus put you on a list. And then the person you were emailing, their mail server decided to use the Spamhaus list. Right, so it's not Spamhaus's fault. It's
right, but isn't the real problem here is there's not like a super simple, straightforward approach to get yourself off these lists because you don't know what list they're subscribed to filter you based on.
Well, most of the ones that send a message back saying why it was rejected include the name of the blacklist. For example, when Google or Gmail blocks you, they send you a link to their help article explaining what to do.
That's good. That's good.
And Spamhaus will say blocked by Spamhaus, and you go to Spamhaus website, and they have these removal instructions.
Yeah, a lot of times, like Comcast's bounce back messages will tell you, go here, fill out this petition.
Yeah, and the same with AOL and so on. But a regular person running their domain off DreamHost isn't going to know what to do with all that.
Have you ever had to do the AOL one before? Talk to the AOL postmaster thing?
I don't think I've had to do AOL before. I don't
think they've updated that procedure since email was originally conceived. It is the most archaic procedure I have ever followed trying to get somebody. The AOL one it's laughably bad.
Yeah. Now, what happened with me at one point was I was with a different kind of local co-location place, and things were going quite well. But when they expanded a bit, they decided to bring in outsourced tech support. Which is fine, but basically they outsourced their tech support, their phone support to the Ukraine. And in some set of circumstances, they ended up hosting a lot of Ukrainian fake pharmaceutical websites. But when the complaints came in from places like Spamhaus and so on, they were somehow ignored by the Ukrainian support people, who might have been the ones running the Ukrainian pharma.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
So they got on the list, which included 2/24s that were mine, or allocated to me anyway.
Oh man.
So I applied and got them removed because I wasn't doing anything illegal.
Yeah.
But they got re-added again because the ISP was still hosting Ukrainian farmer scams.
Right.
And eventually Spamhaus says, you've been removed a bunch of times and just re-added. You're now added permanently.
Yep. I had that happen to a client. I had a client who had a PC that was infected and they didn't know.
Yep.
So what'd you do? Were you just screwed? You had to change IPs?
Yeah, so that was the one where I actually had to stop hosting my name servers and a bunch of other. So I still have a couple servers there that I use for hosting IRC servers and stuff, because they're one of the few ISPs that will let you do that. But basically, I've stopped using that ISP because they have a horrible reputation now.
Yeah, There you go. So that's the RBL. A bunch of details in the show notes, and also that link to check to see if your domain has been added to one of these blacklists. It's a challenge. If you get stuck with that, act fast before it has a chance to get spread around, because a lot of these different sites also share the contents of these. But
lists. Spamhaus and SpamCop and so on will usually provide you. So when you get blocked, you can look up your IP address, and they'll provide you the evidence, which is like copies of spam that they've actually found coming from you.
That's nice.
Because, like I said, I have that patch on PHP that tells me what site and what user the mail was sent as. I can usually quickly track down which machine, which user, and which script are the cause of my problems.
What a nice setup. All right. Well, are you ready for the other Alan's war story this week? It looks like it takes us to the mid-April 1999 time frame.
Yes.
So. Yeah. Now, is this also taking place in the IBM support area?
Yep.
All right, so people are probably familiar enough. They've watched the last few episodes of TechSNAP. Irish, also known as the other Alan, has been writing in some of these war stories. He's worked down in the, the support center for IBM for like a lot of their internal, like he always likes to preface it, IBM has an external facing unit and an internal facing unit, and they work for the internal one and do support over in Ireland.
Right. Well, in this case, this is their external facing one.
Oh, okay. So
he works for the internal one now.
So back
he started
then,
out on frontline tech support.
So where does mid-April 99 take us, Alan?
Yes.
What?
So this is about 2 months into his career as a tech support agent. So his first day that we talked about, this is about 2 months after that.
That was last week's episode. Yeah. Okay. All right.
So despite my rocky start, he had managed to establish a reputation as an agent who liked to tackle the more difficult calls. In addition, he had managed to avoid having customers escalate to the next level on him.
Oh, good.
And this is where a user demands to talk to a superior or supervisor or whatever. Right. So anyway, he arrives for work that day. His shift is 4:30 p.m. to 1:30 a.m., which is probably not a fun shift. But
no.
When you're just starting out, that's the shift you get.
Yeah.
So he settles in to take his first call, and it was a relatively easy one where the user had picked up their laptop from a servicer and it wouldn't boot afterwards. But it turned out to be a simple case that the servicer left a floppy disk in the drive, and you pop it out, and now the machine boots properly.
Yeah, okay, sure. Common mistake, especially back in the day when people had
floppy drives.
Yeah.
So in total, that call took about 13 minutes, including typing up the documentation and so on and so on.
Okay.
So he sets himself available on the phone system again and waits a few minutes and gets the next call. So once he manages to read the initial greeting script, which is usually always too long, he gets slammed by a guy screaming down the line, but wanting to speak to a manager. So Irish hasn't even got to say anything other than hello, and the guy already wants to talk to a manager.
Right. It's probably the accent. He's like, oh, great.
So he was resigned at this point to losing his no escalation record, but he still needed to follow the procedure and determine what the problem was before he escalated it.
Right.
So, why was the user so irate? So it took him a few minutes to calm the guy down enough for him to vent and sufficiently explain to Irish what the problem was. And it turns out that the guy had returned his laptop on 3 separate occasions already, and he'd only had it for a few weeks.
Oh, ouch. So maybe he has a lemon or something. Or the guy's thinking probably.
Mostly compatibility issues with third-party devices that he had purchased.
That can be frustrating. Okay.
Yeah. So, Irish could see his point, why you'd want to escalate, because he's already returned the laptop 3 times and it's still not doing what he wants it to do.
He's getting pretty frustrated by this point. Okay. Fair enough.
So the team leader at the time was easily located, and once he explained the situation, the team leader decided to delegate it to the assistant team leader. So Irish led her over to the desk where she started talking with the user, and Irish walked away to talk with the team leader, expecting to get his ribbing about his first customer escalation.
Right.
Normally, when a team leader or assistant team leader takes over a call, it returns into the user being placated in some manner or otherwise transferred to customer relations. And either way, once the agent, in this case Irish, handed off the call, he'd simply waited for the resolution before taking the next call.
Oh, really? So he doesn't go back in the queue. He still kind of stands by.
Apparently. But anyway, no such luck this time.
Oh.
The assistant team leader walks up to where I was standing and started to explain the situation to the team leader and how the user had returned the machine 3 times and no faults were found, but he still couldn't get his third-party devices to work. Nothing too new there, but then she dropped the bombshell that she had promised the user that Irish would troubleshoot the issue with him immediately.
I guess he must have got a good impression from Irish there, even though he has to escalate right past him. Or she just threw him right in the way of the bus.
The assistant team leader basically said, Irish will help you.
Man.
This is unheard of. The customer had 4 devices that Irish had no familiarity with, and the assistant team leader had just thrown me under the freaking bus.
And the customer's already in a bad mood.
Yeah.
Already grumpy, yeah.
So he looks at the team leader, hoping for some sanity to be brought to the situation, but he acknowledged that the assistant team leader had already committed to a course of action with the customer, so now they had to follow through with that. And Irish is the one that would have to pay for such generosity. So back to his desk, he goes, cursing the assistant team leader, her lineage, and any future offspring she may have.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes. So once he's back on the call, the user started to get more detail exactly what the problem was. The user had a ThinkPad 560, which is termed as a single spindle machine because it only had a hard drive, no floppy, and no optical drive.
Okay.
Now, it comes with an external floppy drive that's attached via an IBM proprietary connector, because back in that day, everything was an IBM proprietary connector.
Yeah.
And the machine was a Pentium 120 megahertz with 32 megabytes of RAM and a 2.1 gigabyte hard drive.
Oh, a monster. Nice. This thing's
and an infrared interface.
Let's play Quake 1 on that bad boy, Alan.
Yeah. It's a laptop, remember? So the graphics were even worse.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So now that I had some idea about the core hardware, I ventured into the realm of the third-party peripherals that weren't working. So the first thing he had was a backpack CD-ROM. So basically a CD-ROM that connects via a parallel port.
Oh, man. Man, that is
Parallel
so old school.
Not that fast. I remember having a SCSI attached one when I worked at the power plant. It was like a 4X CD burner.
Yeah. I had a parallel port zip drive that I carried around with me, and I also that one could, I think, also do SCSI. And oh my gosh, the parallel port between the two was disastrously slow. Plus, I don't know if you remember, but these CD-ROMs were big. Like these were big units you had to carry around.
Yeah, I had one of the SCSI ones. It was like literally more than a foot long.
Yeah.
It weighed a ton. And this one didn't have the regular drawer you expected with a CD-ROM drive. It had these caddies.
Oh,
like a jewel case.
Yeah, those didn't take off.
Case, and then on the bottom, it had a metal door that opened to let the... Yeah, it was weird.
That was the awkward phase. Those were the early days.
Well, it was better than... I saw a couple... I remember the one machine that they had at my high school had a CD changer in it. And so you just fed like 4 CDs into the drive and it had buttons to eject them.
Awesome. Like a music player.
Yeah.
That's kind of handy, really.
Yeah. So he had the backpack CD-ROM, then a PCMCIA modem.
Oh, good.
And a PCMCIA network card.
Oh, good.
Remember, this is Windows 95. That's not going to work. So.
No.
And then a Hewlett-Packard printer that connected via infrared.
Oh, geez, which was so touchy back in the day because like line of sight and
Well, in case nobody's noticed, we don't really use infrared for anything anymore.
no.
It's pretty much dead.
It started as like it was going to be this great wireless transmission thing, and then they're like, well, maybe we'll just do infrared on like palm devices and printers, and then you'd hold the palm device right up to the infrared sensor, and you'd try to line it up and get it to send the print job. It was so awful.
Yeah. Now we have Bluetooth at least or something.
Yeah.
So basically, Irish is like, I knew I was screwed at this point, but I figured it really couldn't make the problem any worse since none of the stuff was working.
Right. Yeah. True point. Good enough.
So he began working with the backpack CD-ROM because that'd probably be the easiest thing to test. So it was attached via the printer port. Windows 95, version 2.1, basically was not detecting any of the hardware once the drive was switched on. So we tried the usual places like Device Manager for any clue as to why it wasn't picking it up. But as far as he could determine, the parallel port was there and operational, but nothing was happening.
Okay. I was going to say maybe the port doesn't work. Okay.
Yeah. But the port was listed and it seemed okay. So anyway, so he put the CD-ROM to the side and tried the PC MCIA cards. Now, Windows 95 plug and play, or also called
plug and pray. Yeah.
Wasn't that great? So the user had proprietary software called Card Magic.
Oh, Card Magic, sure.
Which acted as a crutch for PC MCIA cards.
Right.
But neither card was detected at all. So even with Card Magic, nothing was happening.
There's no magic with Card Magic.
Yeah. And the infrared printer suffered exactly the same problem. No detection.
Oh my gosh.
So he asked the user if he had any other devices that he could attach to the laptop just to see if Windows was detecting anything at all. So the user connected up the external floppy drive and instantly detected by Windows, accessible in Windows Explorer, all good.
Oh, really? Okay, good.
So Irish is like, well, shit. My instincts are telling me that the OS has corrupted in some way and has to do a reload.
Oh, no.
And, you always hated to have to do that to a user, especially with Windows 95.
And over the phone.
Yeah. And in this case, transatlantically.
At 1 in the morning.
Yeah. So he sent an instant message over to the team leader, letting him know that he was going to have to go ahead and do a reload. And he told me to stay on the call with the customer until the reload had completed and then resume working on the third-party hardware problem.
Oh, man. Grab a snack. That's what that means. Grab a snack and a new beverage.
Yeah. So as I was preparing the user for the reload, I had the sudden realization of how bad the situation really was. On a single spindle machine, meaning it has no optical drive or floppy drive attached by default, comes basically with a very specific reload solution, where when the user starts up the computer for the first time, they get prompted to insert floppy disk into the drive as it writes out a reload image.
Right. Of course.
And this reload image is going to be quite a large number of floppies as well. So at first, the customer doesn't recall having any such prompt.
You remember that? You remember that when you'd open up a laptop, the first thing you had to do was make your disk? Oh, yeah. Okay. So the first thing you'd have to do back then is there's this IBM wizard that would come up and it would say, grab a stack of floppies, and it would have a little progress bar up there, and you would sit there and feed it floppies, and then it would tell you, label that disk 1 of 15, and you would have to label it, and you would put it in the stack. And what it would be doing is it would be decompressing and Win95 plus all of their crapware image onto these floppies individually. And you just sit there and do it. And if you skip it, you skipped it. You're done.
Yeah.
Back then.
My desktop came with a reload CD that had basically had that on it.
Yeah.
But
if you didn't have a CD-ROM, that was their solution back then. Yeah.
In this case, the laptop didn't come with a CD-ROM. And CD burners were not really a thing yet.
Right. Oh,
so at first the customer, so Irish gets a sinking feeling that he would have to have the laptop shipped back to IBM so they could reload it since the user didn't have the reload floppies.
No. Who has that many spare floppies just sitting around anyways? Yeah.
And then he would have to pick up troubleshooting the issue after that.
Wow.
But then the user has a eureka moment and tells Irish that he believes that there's a shoebox full of floppies somewhere in his office that might be what he's looking for. So he manages to locate the shoebox containing the 37 floppies.
Oh my gosh.
26 for Windows 95 and 11 for the IBM application layer.
Ugh. 11 wonderful floppies of crap you probably don't want.
Yeah. Well, in this case, it was probably Microsoft Office and some stuff.
Yeah, it could be, yeah. Well, no, I think it'd be more disc than that.
Yeah, it's hard to say. So Irish reckoned that the reload would take about 2 hours to complete, which presented a different challenge. Basically, the team leader had told him to stay on the line through the entire completion of the reload.
Yeah.
But one of the rules of the IBM support center is that there should be no dead silence during a tech support call, which I admit is something I'm really bad for in tech support calls. It's like,
Yeah.
shut up for a minute while I type and think.
Yeah. Oh
What the
boy.
problem could be. But he's basically not allowed to have dead air on the phone call.
But so he's got to keep talking. He's got to keep the person. Oh my gosh.
I'm going to have to find a way to get this guy to talk for 2 hours between me asking him what was on the screen now and how many disks he had left to go through.
I don't really get the no dead air thing too, because as a caller, I don't necessarily want to engage in small talk.
Yeah.
You know, I'd rather just get the problem resolved and move on. I don't really care if they're chatting with me or not.
Right. So anyway, I was just like, this is going to be fun.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
So for the 2 hours of the reload, as the customer went through the 37 floppies, Irish managed to lure him into topics like his job and his prior computer experience and pretty much anything that Irish could think of. So I was trying to hit on a topic that would allow a lot of conversation with middle input from Irish's side, just keep the customer talking so Irish could shut up. But it turned out that the guy was a judge in New York City who handled criminal cases. And the only common ground there was that he could explain to him that he loved My Cousin Vinny, which I guess was a TV show or a movie or something.
Movie, yeah.
Yeah, which he figured wouldn't go down so well. Eventually, he mentioned that his son was at soccer practice and that he would need to arrange for someone else to pick him up since he was stuck on the phone with Irish.
Wow.
While they reloaded the laptop. So that was Irish's angle. He started talking to the guy about every possible soccer item that he could
and probably interrupting with, what percentage is it at now? Okay,
Yeah.
What percentage is it? What disc are you on now?
What's on the screen now?
Yeah.
What's the screen say now?
Oh my gosh.
So the rest of the reload flew by without incident. So we got him into the BIOS and set up the parallel port and the PCI, MCI ports and so on.
Right on.
And then got into Windows. So once the operating system was back on and up and running, we got him to attach the CD-ROM drive. And Irish heard the detection sound over the phone.
Oh, good.
Yay!
Yeah, okay.
Which meant that I at least found one issue and corrected it. Because
now.
Doing a reload and not getting anywhere would feel really bad.
Oh my gosh, the worst.
So Device Manager shows that the CD-ROM has an exclamation mark, and that looked, like it wasn't going to work.
Okay.
So what it needed was basically the DOS mode driver first.
Yeah, okay.
So the customer had the driver disk for the CD-ROM, and Irish is able to walk him through going into DOS mode, installing the driver, and having it set up in config.sys and autoexec.bat. And then a quick reboot later, and the CD-ROM was now usable in Windows 95.
Yay, that's awesome. Okay, so there's some now that's some progress.
Problem number 2 solved. Time for PCMCIA.
Right.
So he decided to start up the modem first because it was easier to test. So upon insertion, the card was instantly detected, and I was able to talk him through configuring card magic and so on. And we hooked it up to the fax line, and we're able to call into the ISP at the staggering or maybe even blistering speed of 28.8 kilobits per second.
Wow, though. I mean, so you went from not working at all to actually be able to dial out to the ISP. That's awesome.
Yeah. So problem number 3 solved. So the network card was up next. So put that in, gets detected, put in the driver and so on. But there's no network near the user that they could test. But Irish was able to talk him through some pinging localhost and running WinIP, CFG, and a bunch of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, everything implied that the TCP IP stack was operational and the bindings were good. So he got the customer to agree that problem number 4 was solved.
All right, good. Very nice. Knocking him down. What about that IR printer?
Yeah, so, they're in the home stretch now. So he looks at the clock and realizes the call's been going on for 3.5 hours already.
Oh, brutal.
So now it's time to work on the printer. The printer is able to print its self-test page from the button on the front of the printer.
Okay.
And it appeared to be working from hardware's perspective. So you got the user to test it using the parallel port first.
Okay.
So disconnect the CD-ROM and connect the printer up with the parallel port.
Right.
And that worked. So he was able to print. So the problem came when they tried to use the IR link to the printer. No matter what configuration we tried, just couldn't get it to connect to the infrared header
Surprise.
on the laptop and with the HP printer. The customer refused to believe that it was the printer that was the problem and was adamant that it was the infrared on the laptop. So Irish is basically completely stuck for a way to prove otherwise.
Right.
But at some point during that, his desperation, he came up with a troubleshooting idea because now he's about at 4 hours in.
Oh my gosh.
So he found an idea that made sense, at least to him. So he asked the user to check what COM port the infrared device was configured as.
Oh, right, yeah.
And then he had him connect to that COM port with Hyperterminal.
Getting clever here, okay.
Yep. So the next request was a weird one. He asked him if there was any TV or VCR remotes around. So after rummaging around for a while, I managed to find the remote for a small TV that was in the office that was hardly ever used. Basically, had him point the remote at the infrared header and press a bunch of random buttons and then look at the Hyperterminal window.
That's a great idea.
And basically, it caused a bunch of gibberish to come up in the window, meaning that the IR port was actually receiving data properly.
Great. That's a great troubleshooting step right there.
Yeah.
Of course, not one that anybody ever needs anymore, but it was a good one at the time.
Also, it doesn't technically prove that that infrared port is able to send.
Okay.
But
all right.
But anyway.
So at least you know the OS is communicating with the hardware.
So he's proved that the infrared port is not dead on this laptop.
Right.
So the problem's the printer. Problem number 5 is solved.
Man. That's a
so
marathon.
He eventually got the customer to agree with that conclusion. And we set up the printer to use the parallel port, and he could just swap the cable if he needed the CD-ROM.
Yeah. How often is he going to need to access the CD-ROM and print at the same time?
Right. So as we're going through the steps of hooking back up the backpack to install the driver for the printer, which I guess must have come on a CD.
Yeah, probably, huh?
He told me that he got a blue screen and then a black screen.
What?
Uh-oh. And then when he reboots, registry not found.
Oh, my, what?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Apparently, he had decided to pull out the PCMCIA card while the LTP printer was installing. And that basically crashed Windows because it was right to the registry when he caused the blue screen.
Oh my gosh. And what is he, like almost 4 hours in at this point? I mean,
over 4 hours in, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So first attempt at the solution was to boot into safe mode, but that failed with the same error. No registry, no joy. So I was only able to get a system to reboot into DOS mode. And from there, backed up the existing registry and restored the user.da0 and system.da0 clean registry files.
Could you imagine walking some noob user through the phone how to do this?
I know.
Oh.
So when he booted back into Windows, he was back in, things started up, but no hardware detected at all.
Oh my gosh.
Back to square one, basically.
I kind of would have been like, all right, I quit. I'm out of here. See you later, IBM.
With just over 4 hours on the timer, the whole procedure had to be done over again. So I asked the user if he could put me on hold for a minute, and he agreed. And Irish finally went and dealt with his bladder.
Jeez, no kidding.
And went to the team leader and told him what had happened. And the sadistic bastard told Irish that he had to go back and help the user do it all over again.
Oh, that's mean.
Yeah. So Irish gets back on the call, and we started going through the whole process all over again from the ground up with one caveat. Don't do anything unless I tell you to.
Right.
So during the 2-hour reload process, I got him to give me his AOL email address and sent him a copy of a tool for Microsoft called the Emergency Recovery Tool.
Yeah.
Or Emergency Recovery Utility.
Okay.
Which sounds like basically the precursor to System Restore.
Yeah.
For Windows 95. So this time around, once we managed to get all the hardware and software to where it needed to be, and done enough tests to prove that everything was going to work, we ran the ERU application and made him store that recovery set in his box of floppies.
Good. Which hopefully he doesn't lose.
Yes. Then we exchanged, regular pleasantries and parted ways. Check the timer, total call time, 8 hours, 38 minutes.
That is brutal. That's like a whole day. That's a whole work day. That's an entire work day.
So on an average day, normally would have dealt with 20 to 25 calls in a single shift. On this day, managed a grand total of 2. with one pee break and no food.
Poor dude.
'Cause he had missed all of his breaks. However, he was able to leave the office 2 hours earlier than expected, and but that doesn't really help with the burnout you get from an 8-hour call or 8.5-hour call.
Jeez.
Wow. But at least he had a new record for the longest tech support call in the history of the call center. And as far as he knows, that record still stands today.
Yeah, it's got to be tough to beat. Yeah. Well, hopefully he's got a friend now, because he definitely went the whole way with that. I mean, that guy better have walked away very impressed with IBM support.
Right. He says, but nowadays trying to get an 8-hour support call is, impossible. Most are focused on, 7 minutes per call, and then that's it kind of thing.
Wow, okay.
Right? Wow. They're trying to deal with volume.
Trying to crank through them, yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Basically, they don't really have the dedication to send the customer away satisfied anymore.
Well, that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, I never did get a medal for that, but if I ever do get into nefarious happenings in New York City, I will be calling in a favor from a certain judge. I think
that guy should remember him after that event. That's one of those things that guy will never forget, that tech support session. Great story, Irish. Well, thank you for emailing that in, and you can send yours in to TechSNAP@jupiterbroadcasting.com. What do you think, Alan? Is that all it for the war story there?
Yep.
All right, well, you know what that means. It's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And welcome to the Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are the stories that didn't make it to the top of the show, but they're still links we think it'd be great if you go check out, or stories we want to cover or follow up on here on the show. And most of them are powered by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. So thank you to everybody who submitted there. And I've also got a new feature we're rolling out on our subreddit that I'll talk about at the end of the Roundup. But Alan, we've got some great stories to get to, and one of them is a common theme on our show, and that's storage, and specifically SSDs. And the first story goes to you, sir.
Yes. So researchers are claiming that SSDs have a number of fundamental flaws, and that they basically have a bleak future.
The future is bleak.
Now, obviously, there's the potential that SSDs could overcome some of these problems. But basically what they're saying is that the maximum size of an MLC-based disk is about 8 terabytes.
Right.
Or no, 4 terabytes even. Yeah, 4 terabytes. And for an, what they call it, a TLC, which is a triple level cell,
right,
is 16 terabytes. And basically, as they found that as they shrink the die sizes on the flash memory chips, the latency and specifically the error rates are getting so high that they basically won't be able to shrink them anymore.
Yeah.
And that they won't be able to fit more flash in the same drive.
This was research done by a couple of companies and Microsoft, right? Like they got together on this. They called it, and when they said, this is an interesting quote that they have here. They said, considering the diminishing returns on performance versus capacity, it's not going to be viable to go past 6.5 nanometers. So 2024 is the end of the line for SSDs.
Now, obviously, by then, they might come up with some change in technology. Right? Remember, regular hard drives had hit about their limit until Seagate invented perpendicular storage.
Right. I mean, didn't we just cover a story about using lasers with spinning disks to get... Yeah, so I mean, they're always developing new ways. They're what they did, and they even say it in their papers, they took the existing technology, and then some of the assumed... and some of the assumed improvements.
But before this, everybody assumed SSDs, if you were willing to pay enough, you could make it infinitely big and have it infinitely fast.
Right.
And the truth is you can't quite do that.
Right. Yeah. All right. The next story on the Roundup is kind of an interesting one. It just shows you, the reason why I threw this one in the Roundup is I talk to a lot of people about the data we share online just sort of all of the time, and how once it's out there forever. And one of the things that really bothers me is the way Twitter just kind of, by default of options and just the way things are set on mobile devices, almost tricks you into tweeting your location. And I've always been kind of uncomfortable with that. This story kind of gives some credence to that. This is a story over at the EFF.org about the government pressuring Twitter to hand over basically tweets, location information, who they were tweeting to, and what they were tweeting about for Occupy Wall Street protesters to the police.
Mm-hmm. And without a warrant.
Without a warrant. Of course, Twitter has fought this back, and in fact, is trying to challenge them in court over it. Again, now here's what this, subpoenaing, getting a warrant for tweets that are already public, that seems just is stupid and a waste of time.
They don't want the tweets. They want the private tweets, but more they want the rest of the data.
Right.
like the IP address it came from,
Right.
the
They want all of that.
geolocation data.
Yeah, they want all of that.
And they definitely shouldn't be able to get that without a warrant.
And the problem is once
the idea
it's
with the
out,
warrant here is that a judge gets to decide whether they have reasonable cause to actually need that information or
true.
not.
But see, what concerns me about it is you can benignly be checking into Foursquare or tweeting your location, and that's just sort of recorded forever, and they can go back and get that at any time to build a case against you. And what if at some point, maybe right now, you don't feel the need to join the Occupy Wall Street movement, but what if a year from now, things have gotten worse and you feel like it's time to step up and go protest? If you're sharing that information now, you're probably sharing it then in the future as well. It's something to think about. In fact, really, I should give a plug for this week's faux show. Go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com and find, I think it was 78, I'm not sure. And we did a whole episode on privacy and ways you can check to see what sites have access to. And also, Alan, you're probably aware that Google is making their privacy policy change on March 1st go into effect.
Yep.
And that's the one that allows any Google service to share data with any other Google service. And one of the areas that really is something to think about is in the past, your Google search history hasn't been available to all of the other Google search platforms and ad platforms and analytics
like
and all
YouTube
that.
and
right.
so on.
Right. So now that on March 1st, they're retroactively applying that privacy policy to all of your previous data. So we talk about that and a few other things in Faux Show 78. People might want to go check it out because there's a few steps you can do now, like purging your search data before March 1st that can help. All right, Alan. Well, the next story on the roundup is about Dutch Parliament and rejecting ACTA.
Yes. So the Dutch government has rejected the ACTA, so they won't ratify it, but they've also decided that it's a violation of human rights of Dutch citizens.
Awesome.
Yes. So Torrent Freak has the full details on that. But now that we've seen a bunch of countries decide not to accept ACTA, including Germany, the Netherlands, and Poland, it's, I think, a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. And I got to keep those countries on the list of countries I need to move to.
Well, actually, the part that makes me happy is that list is basically countries where I have servers or where the companies I rent servers from are located.
Awesome. That's great. All right, well, the next story on the roundup is interesting. It's from RT.com, which I don't usually include them in actual news resources because, they're a government-sponsored news agency. But this one really bothered me this week, and a lot of you probably caught the headline where a U.S. government official came out and said, we expect within the next year that Anonymous will have the capability to attack the U.S. power grid and shut down power to major areas. And that may or may not be true. I mean, we've covered stories about our power grid being woefully unprotected.
Yes, and that really, it's fear-mongering, but it's the issue there is that it's the power grid is not protected, not that Anonymous is somehow...
I got to say, I have been on the offense about Anonymous. I don't necessarily condone their methods, but as of yet, they haven't done anything to harm... Well, I guess that's not really true because they release people's passwords, but their main goal seems to be going after corporate greed. And the other problem is I feel like they're being transformed into this anonymous digital boogeyman that can be used to justify all kinds of things. And this just honestly, to me, sounds like one more attempt to maybe approve some sort of funding for some sort of digital surveillance project or something like that. And Anonymous came out, and of course, this is what they're going to say, but Anonymous released, they said, why would Anon shut off power grid? There are people on life support and other vital services that really rely on it. Try again, NSA, #fearmongering. That's what they tweeted recently.
Well, not just that, but most people that make up Anonymous kind of like to use their computers, which is hard to do when there's no power.
Right.
It's like, people on life support generally have backup systems, but people sitting at their desk don't so much.
I just wanted to cover that story because I want people to think critically when we see these things. I don't want people to get scared into...
Although it reminds me, I was reading the manual for that server that we bought, the ZFS server. I was looking at the other SAS controllers built in. Anyway, on the back of the last page of the manual, in little tiny letters, they have this whole disclaimer about how they think their hardware is pretty good, but they definitely don't think you should use it in anything that's for life support, airplanes, nukes.
Apple's hardware comes with that too. Like if you buy like the stupid Apple wireless router, it comes with a sheet in there that says you cannot use this in a nuclear facility. Nuclear facilities and life sustaining. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And it's like, and if you choose to do so, you have to indemnify us.
All right. Well, we got another NSA story in the roundup. You want to take this one out?
Yes. The NSA has declassified rejected proposals for a cryptography system submitted by Dr. John Nash, who's a famous mathematician. It's the character that, or the person, A Beautiful Mind, the movie is based on.
Oh, okay.
From the 1950s. So in the 1950s, he wrote a bunch of letters to the NSA detailing this encryption system he had kind of come up with. And they didn't end up using it, but they've now released his letters into their museum.
Cool.
And it's if you're interested in cryptography, there's a bunch of cool. And along with his actual letters, they have their responses to his letters, but also their internal memos about what he had said.
Oh, okay.
And a bunch of other stuff.
It's probably a pretty interesting read, especially for people who are kind of curious.
Now, a little, the letters he wrote are like they're scans of handwritten.
Yeah, I was just showing a few images.
Carbon
paper
funny. from the 50s.
It's great. It's great.
But it talks about, and they're saying it's actually a pretty good auto keying system, although it lacks some of the features we need, so we wouldn't use it. But
right. All right. Well, the next story is hopefully a good sign. It came from the Obama administration this morning, the morning that we're recording this show, and they're unveiling what they call their Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights. And of course, this is coming in the wake of a lot of recent privacy things that Google has gotten themselves in trouble with.
And Facebook also, but
right.
I think it also covers some stuff just from data breaches and how you have to be notified, right?
Yeah, and I'm still actually digesting it, so I don't know about that particular part of it. So I am reading. CNET has a really good post on it, and here's a quick quote from it. It says the president's privacy framework assures that as new internet services are developing, privacy rules will keep up with them and not hamper the pace of innovation. That's kind of a mixed. That almost to me sounds like we don't want privacy to get in the way of company profit, but at the same time we want privacy rules to keep up. Like it sounds like they're trying to straddle both fences there.
Yeah, well, you don't want overly restrictive where companies can't aggregate data. Google wouldn't be able to do what Google does if they didn't have some data on you that maybe they keep anonymously. They don't match up to your identity. Yeah, it's just now that they are matching everything up to your identity, it gets a little,
it'll be
basically they're saying, how about we set out some ground rules that everyone can live with that will at least provide us, make sure customers know what's happening and that, they have some options.
Yeah. Now, also though, one of the other things that they say is that at least initially it'll be self-regulated, self-enforcing.
Yeah.
And another quote that I pulled here is the administration has been working on the online privacy bill for 2 years in consultation with the industry, privacy advocates, academics, and enforcement agencies. This was a commenter from the Electronic Privacy Information Center. He says, the principles are genuinely good so far, but the problem is that there's no plans for implementation or enforcement. And the Obama administration says they're planning to reach out to Congress to see if they can get some sort of, enforcement and funding for it. But it's a good start. I'm glad it's something they're watching. All right.
And I think what it needs is strong protections, like during a data breach.
Mm-hmm.
Company like Sony, when they give out your information, they have to notify you more quickly than I think they did. They actually got in trouble in Canada because there's a procedure they were supposed to follow that they didn't. And they didn't notify Canadians as quickly as they're legally required to, that their data was compromised.
I'll do it. I'll get them in trouble.
But we have very strict privacy laws and personal information and so on.
Should we talk about, speaking of privacy laws and personal information, Australia kind of got in trouble for crossing the line, didn't they?
Yes, the Australian police apparently have been caught spying on people's web and phone usage without a warrant.
Oh, man.
Now, this could be a case of the police call up the ISP or the phone company and ask for it, and the phone company just gave it to them without requiring a warrant. Or it could be a little bit more than that. I didn't actually read all of the story.
But we have some Australian viewers and listeners, so guys, go check out the show notes and read about that one.
And then the other one we had was an EU court has ruled that hosting companies and social networks and so on cannot be forced to run anti-piracy filters, as that would violate the privacy of the individual users and also would hinder the right to freedom of information.
So anti-privacy filters are hindering the right...
Piracy, not privacy.
Anti-piracy filters are... So essentially what they're saying is trying to screen out piracy is blocking free speech.
Yeah. Well, freedom of information, but also just... It would basically require analyzing everything the user's about to look at.
Yeah.
And to see if it's pirated or not. And so doing that apparently would be a breach of their privacy.
Can't disagree with that. Boy, Torrent Freak's been following this stuff lately, haven't they?
Yes.
They really are.
Well,
all right,
that's
Alan.
basically what they do.
I have a fun thing I want to introduce for the show now, and we've decided to do it in conjunction with our links.techsnap.tv subreddit, and that is we're going to take submissions for the TechSNAP Hall of Shame. And that is companies that have had some sort of massive public breach that we think they should probably go on the list so it's remembered that they screwed up so badly. And what we're going to do is go over to links.techsnap.tv to submit your idea for the Hall of Shame. And when you do it, tag it with, in brackets, Hall of Shame, just like Gooberslot did here on this one. And so our first Hall of Shame submitter, which is going on the official TechSNAP list, is youporn.com, which maybe some of you out there might be familiar with YouPorn. They're like, I guess, in the top 100 websites online. And they had I guess probably considering they're that big, they're that large, this is a rather minor leak. They had 6,400 subscriber passwords and emails leak, and the data dump was thrown up on Pastebin. And
right, so that doesn't mean that more passwords weren't compromised. It's just this is how many the attackers have posted so far.
Right, absolutely. YouPorn appears to have shut down the breach server. This is kind of funny too. The number one domain of YouPorn email users is Hotmail, followed by Gmail. And they also did, and this is a good one, Alan, are you ready for this? They did a word cloud. Oh, the word cloud went down. Oh man, they had a word cloud of all of the different. Earlier, yeah, and it was like QWERTY. I was amazed at how much QWERTY was used.
QWERTY 1, 2, QWERTY 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 5.
But it looks like they had it up on Dropbox, and it looks like they exceeded their maximum.
And a couple
bandwidth.
Other ones. I saw Arsenal and a couple of football team names. I saw Melinda and a couple of different girls' names.
So and a few other sexual
also
acts.
Quite a few 4-letter words, which obviously should never have been allowed. That password's too short. It shouldn't have been allowed. I understand it's only YouPorn. Yeah. But
so if you use YouPorn and use that password or else, go change your password. But so congratulations to YouPorn. You are the first submitted company to the TechSNAP Hall of Shame list. Yes. Pretty exciting. So as we go on, we'll continue to add things. And at some point, we're going to have to review them and kind of have a good chuckle. Maybe we'll do like a best of Hall of Shame at some point down the road.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, Alan, is there anything else you want to cover in this episode?
No.
Man, there it is. That's all of episode 46. Well, everyone, I want to remind you that TechSNAP is posted over at jupiterbroadcasting.com with links to everything we talk about. But also, you can download this episode in several formats from HD to mobile and audio only for you commuters. And I want to suggest that you go grab the RSS feeds and subscribe to those. That way you just get the show automatically every single week that we post it over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. And also, I encourage you to join us live over at jblive.tv. You can rock out with our live IRC chat room, and we do that at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is 4 p.m. Eastern and
2100 UTC.
2100 UTC. We also have a live audio stream at jblive.am for those of you who are either on the road and want to listen. Maybe you're stuck at your desk. Maybe you just like audio. You can check that out at jblive.am. All right. Okay, Alan. Well, good show. Yep. And I want to say thanks to everyone for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.